guys, what's going on? Welcome back to another quick video. So today we're going to be going over the top 5 surreal moments in history that actually happened that you don't hear about. So before we get started, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and also turn on post notifications, and comment down below what your favorite part of the video was. So there are some moments in history that are so odd, so surreal, that they sound completely made up. Here, the most curious things that happened in history. First up, we have the ancient Egyptian strike action. Going on strike, you would presume, is closely linked to the history of industrialization and the formation of trade unions. While it was, of course, the industrialization of economies that led to better organized work forces, the idea of putting down tools because of dispute goes back a very long way indeed. The first strike recorded in history started in 1152 BC on the 14th of November. This was during the reign of the Ramses III in ancient Egypt. It is a common misconception, largely created by biblical stories, that much of the work in ancient Egypt monuments was carried out by slaves. While the Egyptians did indeed have slaves, they were by no means the main workforce. Craftsmen, builders, and haulers were paid men who took the pride in their work. This evidenced by the quality of these structures, many of which have stood for more than 3,000 years. So that's the first thing that we thought was really cool over here. The next up thing we have that really no one hears about is the American invasion of Korea. Not the one in the 1950s though, the one in 1871. A number of Asian nations sealed themselves off from the outside world, most famously Japan and China, but Korea as well. America had decided to unlock these Asian states and trade with them. It had worked well in Japan with the diplomatic mission led by the Commodore Perry in the 1850s, but the idea was put on hold during the American Civil War. It wasn't until 1871 that a small fleet of American ships returned to the Pacific and traveled to the coastline of Korea. The American diplomatic vessel, which was a merchant ship, not a warship, came in towards the shore and was fired at by Korean battleships. The Americans landed 10 days later with 650 Marines and sailors, and they made contact with the local Korean officials, but the Koreans wanted to avoid the discussion about opening fire on a diplomatic mission. It was a classic case of cultural misunderstanding. The Koreans did not want to lose face over the error, and Americans mistook this for arrogance and decided to teach the Koreans a lesson unknowingly. The Marines then had assaulted and captured Ganhwa Island's forts, the batteries, had probably fired on the diplomatic mission. The series of clashes were one-sided, and Korea had not moved with the times and was using virtually medieval technology tactics against the well-trained and equipped Americans. And by the end of the day, the Americans had captured all the forts with the loss of just 3 men, while the Koreans had suffered losses of 243. So yeah, I personally never heard this out of a history book, but I think this is pretty cool. Next up, we have an underwhelming battle in World War II. Castle Eder is a small fortification in Austria used by the SS during the Second World War as a prison for high-profile detainees. It was also the site of one of the most curious battles of the conflict. On May 6, 1945, peace was on the horizon and the Third Reich was collapsing, with German commander, also in charge of Dachau, committing suicide, and some of the Waffen-SS soldiers retreating. One of the prisoners, Zvonimir, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, a Yugoslavic freedom fighter escaped and went looking for some Allied troops to rescue the rest of the prisoners. He found an American armored column and got to them to come with him. At the same time as Major Josef Gandl, an Austrian in the German army, had collaborated with the Austrian resistance in the closing days of the war, also with the intent to free the castle prisoners, but had decided instead to go surrender with his men to the Americans. The arrival of Kukovic, a strangle agreement would take place. The major and his Wehrmacht troops fought alongside the Americans against the SS guards. The battle may have not been big, because there was only like 100 men involved, but it was vicious. The Sherman tank was destroyed and Major Josef Gandl was killed by a sniper. It was, however, the only time the American army fought alongside the German army in the entire war. The SS were defeated and surrendered, and the rest of the prisoners were released unharmed. The immovable interest rate. Britain did not invent banking, and as we know today, many of the concepts were copied from Holland, but with a growing empire, England rapidly became the master of what today is termed modern banking. The Bank of England was founded in 1694 and was given exclusive possession of the government's balances, and it was additionally given permission to be the only corporation rather than a government to issue banknotes. What the bank also did in the same year was set the first national interest rate at 6%. While today we are familiar with the changing interest rates didn't start moving around regularly until the late 19th century. In 1719, the Bank of England moved its interest rate from 4% to 5%, but it didn't move again until 1822, when it went back down to 4%. That interest rate lasted 103 years and the longest fixed rate in British history. So I thought that was kind of cool. Next up, we have the Sack of Baltimore. In the southern Ireland, there is a small village called Baltimore. Little to contribute to history until the summer of 1631, when it was attacked, but by whom? Was it the French planning an invasion of England via the Emerald Isle, or perhaps it was some kind of pro-Catholic uprising leading to a vicious English assault, or the Spanish up to their old tricks? You might be surprised to learn that the perpetrators were about as exotic as it gets for the 17th century. Barbary pirates from North Africa led by a Dutch captain and a Muslim convert turned pirate. Jan Juzan van Haarlem, also known as the Maraud race the Younger. The attack was quite unexpected, and the villagers, mainly English settlers, but some native Irish settlers too, were put on the ships and forced into slavery. They were, however, different types of slaves. Some prisoners were destined to live out their days as galley slaves, a brutal and short life, while many of the younger women would spend long years in the seclusion of the Sultan's harem or within the walls of Sultan's palace as laborers. Sadly, it thought that only 3 of the settlers ever saw Ireland again. So guys, that's it for the video. I do hope you enjoyed. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'm out. Peace.